Hi, folks. Roach here again. This is the third part of the series revealing the Holy Grail, titled The Holy Grail Law. Now, again, if you haven't watched part 1 and 2, then you'll probably want to do that. Otherwise, you risk the problem of not having sufficient context or background in order to continue, because it is kind of contingent on that. However, you can always go back to it. The backgrounds, of course, are I'm going to continue with more things that are in my yard, so enjoy. Once one knows on, then a natural question is to know what law and power is manifest by on, how is it manifest, and why. One must know what law is, and how these events in nature proceed flawlessly according to this law. To start being on is to fix consciousness on the immediate moment. To be in the now is to be in the know. The mind is accessed only through the immediate moment. There is only one mind. The brain does not produce the mind. The brain is merely a tool that brings sensory access to its own holographic projection. Therefore, the brain is master of thought, memory, logic, feeling, and the illusions of free will, space, matter, control, future, and past. To fixate on these illusions is to remain locked within these illusions, and the general tendency is to distract oneself from the immediate moment with past regret, or a longing for future expectation, or a fear of the impending. That is not to say that memory and past have no use, as they are vital to the direct reinforcement in the lessons of cause and consequence, and they also provide a view of the flawless precedence of law. Similarly, future, for the basis to provide the necessity of surprise, either snaps one's attention back to the immediate moment, or rewards one joyously for right action. Conversely, the mind dwells only in the immediate, and therefore that is the only realm of truth, love, law, purpose, reason, and consciousness. There is one mind, and all external others are merely illusory reflections of the singular on. The external then is merely a reflection whereby consciousness and the mind can know truth by an external study of its opposite. The truth lies within and not without. The external is an individual interactive classroom used to experience the nature of truth and fiction, life and death, love and hate, law and chaos, right and wrong, good and bad, joy and suffering, etc. Nothing occurs here, in our experience, against our will. Herein lies the core of responsibility. Responsibility has at its roots response, and response can only be made manifest in the immediate moment. If one is continually distracted by allowing their attention to remain with the illusion of either past or present, then they either are unresponsive, unconscious, asleep, or dead. If one does not accurately discern that which truthfully occurs in their immediate moment, then they are irresponsive or irresponsible, incompetent, or lacking a clean sanitary mind, insane. Those who are responsible have a duty to care rightfully for those who are unresponsive, irresponsible, incompetent, or insane. If you are not responsible, then others who are responsible have power over you. That is law, and they are given power by you to force you. It's not against your will, as you choose to do this willingly. It is a position of weakness, suffering, and self-abuse, as one succumbs to wrong choices and fails in the capacity to know the truth. We incorrectly apply the law and remain unable to exercise a right. We each, as material individuated facets or viewpoints of consciousness, exist and are bound by strict liability for our actions. We are not only responsible for what we do, but more importantly, what is done to us. The essential second part of responsibility escapes us if we are completely trapped and distracted by our identification solely as material or corporeal bodies. We are not our bodies, rather the conscious spirit that dwells, for time, within that body, all bodies. There is a distinct mechanism by which the program of the individual facet is facilitated, much like a computer program. This is where the program is edited, and changes are made to the program. The program is paused, changes are made, and then the program is run. Physical awareness is suspended while the program is edited, and likewise when the program is restarted. The changed elements remain hidden from consciousness. These program elements are what unconsciously drive the behavior of the body, and in the events that unfold in our experience. If the program is well written, the experience may be comfortable. But if they are required for a lesson, then they cause purposeful suffering until they are corrected. Any who are familiar with hypnosis has seen this editing process in action through post-hypnotic suggestion. One also is familiar with the primary protection mechanism that keeps aberrant programming changes from being made to our programs. He who is being reprogrammed must trust the programmer, or the state of editing will not be entered into, and no change to the program can be made. Once one gives over and trusts a would-be hypnotist, they subject themselves willingly under the hypnotist's complete authority. There is no act more dangerous and fraught with peril and suffering than to allow another to gain access to this supreme authority over them. And this is one of the most important and largely unlearned law by man at this time. It is not that we are not aware of this law, as it is continually being reinforced, both in forewarning and by harsh consequences for not heeding and appreciating the warning. It should not come as a surprise, as this, under Judeo-Christian law, is known as the First Commandment. Our error is not the withholding of the law, but rather our use of language in its interpretation. The law is stated, "Have no other gods before me." Many interpret that to establish merely the supremacy of a singular god, or the mere premise of the supremacy of monotheism over polytheism. The lowercase g in gods, as used, indicates any man, woman, object, idea, feeling, or concept. The word me is on. Restated for clarity, take no man, woman, object, idea, feeling, or concept as truth, as an authority over the truth, or on. We know the difference between truth and fiction, as it resonates unmistakably with us, and its proof is borne out flawlessly in our experience. Do not trust me in this. You have a responsibility to prove it to yourself. Where this becomes a source of suffering is when the child gives over and willingly subjects themselves under the authority of God, and simply accepts all that God proclaims as truth. Herein shows how a parent programs their child with the same errors And we are conditioned and programmed with the same values and the same primary errors. That is not a problem if the parent's own program is error-free, but we live in an age where we cannot break free from our aberrant programming. We have institutionalized the automated manufacture of our error in all forms of education, our institutions, our schools, universities, government, business, churches, philosophies, statutes, science, and history. We are conditioned not to question those in authority. We have been subject to generations who take television programming as authoritative and true, and worse, copy that false reality in our own lives. Is it any wonder we now face problems we are unable to solve? We are an insane, irresponsible, incompetent people, mired in our own complete ignorance of the law, and inescapably shackled by our own self-abuse and criminality. One cannot know the Holy Grail if they are willfully ignorant of the law, as the Holy Grail is law. Nor can we enjoy justice, as justice cannot exist without the law. As we are strictly liable for what we do and what is done to us, then our ignorance of the law is no excuse. We even lack the capacity to appreciate the truth that we are ignorant of the law. One cannot solve a problem without first realizing that a problem exists. The nature of confusion, not fused with on, is not knowing one is confused. One cannot refrain from criminality if one is ignorant of the law, such that one is unconscious of their error. What is the purpose of us being in this state? We cannot truly know freedom until we do not have it. We cannot know sanity without insanity. We cannot know law without lawlessness. We cannot know truth without fiction. It is necessary for us to know and experience this so that we can truly learn the value. You cannot know responsibility without first experiencing what it is to be irresponsible. You cannot exercise a right and power without first being responsible, because with rights come responsibility. You cannot know the law without first being responsible, as the irresponsible choose not to know the law by their willing, uninfringed choice. Here is your problem. I can't teach you the law against your will. Do I have your complete attention yet? If you are not willing to assume full responsibility for everything that occurs in your experience, then what follows will be completely meaningless to you. When I speak of law, I don't mean fictions of law. Law means power that has force and moves people and matter in our experience. The law does not compel performance. That means nothing will stop you from abiding the law, and nothing stops you from going against it. There are consequences for each action, be it right or wrong. If you jump from a cliff willingly, then there is nothing that has the power to stop you from choosing to do so, or not choosing to do so. If you willingly choose to subject yourself to the law of gravity, then expect the consequences to proceed in a way that leads to suffering and not joy. Your willingness to act is what binds you to the consequences, and the law requires that you sustain the consequences. For you to commit a crime, there must be a real victim that was really injured by your actions, and you must be the cause. To be liable for a crime, you must be competent and sane at the time you acted. Insanity is not a free pass to commit a crime, as you will enjoy a lack of freedom if you are ignorant of the law, and do not know the difference between right and wrong. Conversely, you are not a victim merely because you claim to be, as all requirements must be met to empower the victim over the perpetrator. When you violate the rights of another, you create injury, so that your willing complicity binds you under the power of your victim, such that they can be made whole. Those are the unavoidable consequences of your willingness to violate the right of another. The aggressor or perpetrator loses all rightful power to the victim. A false flag and consensus does not make the aggressor the defender. The knight who is true will always prevail in combat over the knight who is false, as that is the law of trial by combat. Even if the victim is dead, the power of consequences is expressed as the dead cry out from the grave. The consequences against the perpetrator are forced, and the power comes by way of contract. If you experience force, then look for the presence of a contract. A contract is an agreement by two or more facets of being to cooperatively manifest an exercise of rights and power. We have an unlimited right to contract. For a real contract to exist, it must contain the four following essential components, and without these components, then the contract is not a contract and does not carry real force in law. 1. There must be an offer. One party must ask. 2. There must be an acceptance. All parties must willingly accept the offer. 3. There must be an exchange of real consideration. Real includes your time, attention, labor, and material. 4. There must be a meeting of the mind. The last three requirements nullify most agreements we mistakenly think are contracts in the world today. Many colorable contracts are contracts of adhesion, whereby the party entering in does not know they accepted the terms and conditions of the contract. Real consideration does not include colorable compensation. That has only perceived but no real value. We often trade our real time and labor for legal tender that has little intrinsic value and does not allow us to pay debt, but only discharge our debt. The last element is very critical, as a corporation, being a fiction of law, exists only in the thoughts of men. They do not have a mind. I've never seen or touched the state of Texas. It cannot present itself. It cannot think or agree to authorize others to act on its behalf, and since it is not material, it cannot be a victim of any crime. Those who claim to represent the state of Texas, Microsoft, the United Nations, etc., commit the crime of fraud, as they cannot prove that they are lawfully authorized by these fictions to act on their behalf. Legal, being a lie or a fraud we willingly choose to believe. When we choose to no longer believe the lie, then they and those that claim to represent them lose all real power. By your word you are bound to contract. If you say you agree, and you say you will do something, then choosing not to follow through is a breach that becomes a bond or a shackle around your leg. The other party becomes a victim, and power is marshaled against you. All contracts are buyer beware. You are strictly responsible for knowing what you're getting yourself into. You must be provided reasonable means to discern all parts of a contract. You must ask and you must be provided. Any term or condition withheld in a contract is nullified and unenforceable, and may make the entire contract unenforceable. In matters in resolving disputes between parties to a contract, the following applies. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and looks like a duck, then it is a duck. That means, if it appears that you are in performance of a contract, then the law presumes a contract is in force. That is, if you do not overtly and openly reserve your rights beforehand. Why enforce an unenforceable contract which has force only by your own ignorant actions? All real contracts must involve an exercise of right or rights. A contract used to deprive an uninvolved third party of a right is not enforceable and is nullified. Doing that is not a contract, but rather a criminal act. Depriving others of a right against their will is a criminal act, and not a right. All parties to a contract must be responsible and competent. You cannot make an enforceable contract with the insane, incompetent, or irresponsible. If any part of a contract is colorable, fiction, then the entire contract is colorable or a fiction. We each must see what contracts are in force, in our experience, and prove to ourselves their true enforceability. Now here are some other laws that are useful. If you ask permission, it's assumed you need permission. No one is going to interfere or stop you from willingly subjecting or placing yourself under the authority of another. You are specifically cautioned against that. If your action is a right and creates no victim, then you need not seek permission. License is permission to break the law. Attorneys require a license to break the law, as fictions of law are a fraud against those who do not consent or those who explicitly establish and reserve their rights not to be subject to fiction. Even though the bar grants them a license to break the law, that does not mean you have granted them a license. And a responsible man has the power and right to revoke that license at any time. If a bar-licensed attorney continues to practice his craft against you after you have revoked his license to do so, then you have the power to have his bar license revoked. If the bar does not do so, then they no longer retain the lawful right to issue any license to anyone for any reason. The created is not more powerful than its creator. Men create governments, fictions of law, colorable jurisdictions, systems of law, corporations, and statutes. Therefore, these created entities do not have power over man. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The more you desire, the more the universe pulls it away. The more you fear something, the more the universe puts it in front of you. The key is balance. All traps are baited with savory bait. It always appears as something you want, until you take the bait. The Bible is a great source of natural law, and I like the Geneva 1599 version, as it was taking reprobate kings and queens to task, and that is why King James decided to, quote-unquote, retranslate it for his own purposes. Among those laws, there is one that is real important, and it is called the Golden Rule. From the Geneva 1599 version, Matthew 7:12. Therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, even so do ye to them. This law works in both directions. If you lie to people, then you give your consent, willingly, to be lied to. That includes lying to yourself or stealing from yourself. If you feel like you are a slave, then it's probably a good idea to look at the ways that you, in ignorance and unconsciously, enslave others. If you abuse yourself, then the law says it's only right that others can abuse you. We complain that criminals are enslaving us and abusing us, when in truth they are simply doing as we command them to do. Think of it as a service they provide, as all they are really doing is showing us what we choose to do to ourselves, as they are just our own reflection. While we decide to blame them, then we never assume the responsibility for our part in it, and we never see that the problem outside of us is truly a problem within us. You cannot solve a problem until you realize the problem exists. In this way, forgiveness is the ultimate weapon of mass creation. Forgiving those outside of you is how we forgive ourselves. It is up to you to set the time that your suffering ends. The Holy Grail is a lawful exercise of power through a right. We choose to be here and be who we are, to go through exactly what you are going through right now. A condition of playing the flesh DVD movie in which we find ourselves in is that we agreed to forget who we are, only to joyously rediscover ourselves. We cannot appreciate home until we leave home for a time and then return. This is the value and fun part about this little game we are playing. You entered your experience through contract, and the Holy Grail is the means of fulfilling that contract, as the realization that you are on was the objective of the contract. Once that contract is fulfilled, then there is no longer a need for force. The Holy Grail. I will trust myself on without condition if on removes from me my ability to create a victim. This agreement is ordained as it must be willingly accepted by On to have force in law. You will know when it is accepted. If you study the above Holy Grail agreement, then you will notice that it is complete and unidirectional, meaning that once you go there, you cannot return. You will always trust yourself without condition, and you will only be subject to your own authority. Why? Because if you were to fail to trust yourself without condition, then you would create a victim of yourself. And you cannot do that because you have your ability to create a victim removed from you. You being your own victim is not possible under this agreement. Therefore, you will trust yourself on without condition. That is it. Now let us apply these laws you have learned to your experience. Let us now look at the first corporation you were stuffed into by your parents. Were you even aware they did that? Were they even aware they did that? Is that corporation you? Did you have the means of discerning the terms and conditions of that contract? Were you provided the reasonable means of knowing the terms and conditions? Were you sane, competent, and responsible when that contract was created? Did your parents have the rightful power to bind you to their contract with this fictional state? Are you, being a man or woman, not more powerful than this fictional state and this colorable contract? Is not a forced application of a colorable contract against you, who do not consent, anything more than a criminal fraud? All colorable obligations are self-imposed and empowered only by our ignorance of the law. Can you see all the business apple carts about to be overturned, when more and more people realize that they are not obligated lawfully to repay a self-imposed obligation that is based only on a fraud, and that only has power against those who are obligated by their own ignorance of the law? What happens when we no longer rely on the fraud of a legal system and instead recreate new lawful courts? The only reason a legal system exists now is because we are largely ignorant of the law and unable to establish lawful courts. There is no need of attorneys in a lawful court. Counselors in law, maybe. But a man requires no representation by an attorney. Do you see why much of this is new to you and why it does not appear everywhere you look? You cannot see it until you are ready. Are you ready to let yourself in on your own practical joke? Now jump out of that chrysalis and do what butterflies do. As a responsible butterfly, you have a duty to exercise the proper care of those who are irresponsible. I would love to simply occupy and sustain myself simply by teaching the law. At this time, I cannot do that, as too few are ready. Have we had enough yet? I can see no better purpose than teaching the caterpillars the law and making more butterflies. Can we all at least spread the word? Thank you for being me. Roge.